It is every police leader's responsibility to not only continually develop their own skills and abilities, but to prepare the next generation of leaders. Retired Captain William Frost helps you meet this task by providing a clear blueprint to follow in his book, Leadership in Law Enforcement. To learn more about his book and other consulting and training he provides, go to www.code33consulting.com. That's code33consulting.com.
I've seen some of the best officers come through my command that have, received disappointment, and some react very differently. And we watch very closely as leaders how people react to disappointment, and if they're willing to be able to accept it and reflect and, become more self-aware as a result of it, that's shows good leadership qualities.
We recorded it all, but I get it. I appreciate his honesty where he was so worried that if he brings in this cop and now, it's interacting with Commander Tung and we're talking about how to be safe, he's worried about these prevailing voices.
And if we listen to that voice all the time, unfortunately, it begins to tarnish what we believe is so good about this profession.
More tenuous years, it did feel like it was just hate and discontent. But we have to recognize those were some of the loudest voices that were also given a megaphone. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by a gentleman who I've been on his show. I've been able to meet and converse through his podcast, but we'll get to that later. Chief Neil Dubord. Chief, thank you for coming on the show today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Eric. And, first of all, congratulations on your podcast. I know that you've done tremendous work on it, and obviously it's paying off as well. So,
no, thank you so much. And I appreciate the modeling of people like yourself, getting the message out, trying to scale these positive messages, whether it's cultural for law enforcement, wellness, leadership. We'll probably hit on all these things. And a shout out to our mutual professional colleague and friend, Mark Bouchard, who introduced me to you. And for a long time, I feel like probably for as long as we've been connected and communicating about these things that are so critical, police wellness, resilience, he was dropping your name and saying, you got to get on Chief's show. You got to connect with him and have him on your show. So I just appreciate the time, of course, and all your experience and everything that you share with our industry.
Yeah, no, we're blessed, aren't we? And Mark Bouchard, I second your shout out. He is certainly a networker and a connector. So I appreciate all he's done for the Bend Don't Break podcast and being able to connect with people that are meaningful and have a message to share.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chief, if I could ask you to introduce yourself, what brought you into law enforcement? And clearly the teaser, you're a chief. So you've advanced, you've done a lot of things in your career, lessons learned, and but we'll start with your entry into law enforcement. Why and what brought you in?
All of us have a connection somehow to law enforcement, whether it be through a relationship, a friend, or something that we've seen or done. And I was fortunate that I had a neighbor whose name was Robbie Robertson, and he was a police officer with the Edmonton Police Service, where I started my service. And Robbie was amazing, right? He was so passionate and energetic and loved the job so much that he encouraged me to be able to go out on a ride along. And as you know, Eric, as soon as you go on your first ride along, you're hooked, right? That is like putting the bait in the water and going into a pool of fish that are going to take a big bite. So I did. I was fortunate enough. I applied with the Edmonton Police Service, and I was deferred the first time. And so as a result, I went back and did some more work on myself and was accepted way, way, way back, probably longer than most of your listeners have been alive, in 1987. So that's where it started. Yes. So 38 years ago now.
Yeah, I love that. I also appreciate you highlighting that fact, and a lot of vulnerable, strong leaders do like to share that it wasn't easy, and it's not just a natural thing. I think it says a lot for the new applicants coming in that listen in, as well as the younger officers that are looking at the potential trajectories of their career assignments and promotions and things that may come, that it's not your first time, that you just jump in, and just because you're a chief now doesn't mean you're a natural in the initial testing phase, myself included. I failed my first oral board. I like to talk about that, to share that experience, that hey, you gotta pick up your chips and regroup. And what helped you in that process, in that specific lane?
You know what I'll start with is that I had the opportunity to be able to read my file later in my career when I, was obviously on the job and had a chance to be able to read your file before promotions and to get ready.
Mm.
And when I read my file, I saw a note in there which was pretty amazing. So my first interview, the guy called me a dish rag. So that was actually
Wow.
written in there. So that's, I think, the first time I've ever shared that publicly in relation to a podcast. But I did go back to work, and I had to do things that I found. I had to get a job that was more related to policing. I had to understand the culture a little bit more. I was naive and young, and I needed to mature. I matured about 18 months before I was accepted. And sometimes getting that life experience, moving out of the house, having all those different experiences to help you grow up was very beneficial. So that's sort of what I did. I moved out of the house. I began to mature. I began to understand a little bit more about life. And with that life experience, I was successful on round two.
Yeah, I like that. And I think my connection for the newer listeners that are, they're applicants, they're prospects, is my takeaway was I didn't necessarily need the time, but I needed the reflection and growing up. And part of growing up was recognizing that I needed to be myself, and I needed to be the best version of myself. And so my first oral board, I was trying to be something I wasn't. I was trying to be what I thought police agencies wanted to hire in a new police officer. But really, we talk about all the time on the show or otherwise, but we want to hire character. We want to hire potential. We want to hire the person and their experiences and their life lessons that they bring in, right? And that's where you talk about that life experience, that, you left the nest, you did some reflection, you put that time to work, right? 18 months, and you weren't the same kid coming back. You weren't the dish rag. I don't imagine human resources would love reading something like
Yeah.
that these days, or civil service down here, but different times though.
Yes, no, you're absolutely right. And you know what? It's not bad to have disappointment and see how people react through disappointment as well. I've seen some of the best officers come through my command that have, received disappointment, and some react very differently. And we watch very closely as leaders how people react to disappointment, and if they're willing to be able to accept it and reflect and become more self-aware as a result of it, that's shows good leadership qualities. And other people, it's always the world's fault, never their fault.
Yeah.
So you watch closely, and that disappointment was good for me.
Yeah, that was definitely a couple themes that have been repeated as of late, and they're intersecting. One is that ownership, right? That self-development, that hunger to seek and address the feedback in a positive, constructive way, versus the victim mentality, right? It's everyone
Yes.
else's fault. And there's direct, tangible translation to that. When you look at giving someone a tall responsibility, being a police officer is a huge responsibility. It is, in some ways, an inexorbitant amount of power in the wrong hands, right? We see how that looks. Unfortunately, we see it at times. But then to promote people and give them more authority, more influence over a chunk of the organization, and to see how people reflect in adversity, and that might be a test. But I mean, think about what a test is really supposed to be. It's supposed to show you these things and try to emulate how things might pan out when someone faces challenge. But then you're going to have real challenges when you take that job or you're acting in the role. And so, all to say that and I've heard so many stories from executive leaders, especially because you see so many of those instances at different ranks. But when people are disappointed and they take their notes and they go to work and they seek continual feedback and critique, versus throw their hands kind of up in the air, and they kind of prove that, right? They kind of prove that they weren't ready for the role when they do that.
It's so true. The actions speak louder than words. And, to know that everyone out there listening, that if you do receive disappointment, the next most important step you take will be how you react to it. And everyone will be watching very, very closely. And if you choose to react negatively, that'll reflect on your character and your integrity and certainly the qualities of the leader. So you're right on the money. And just another point love to pick up, I think it's probably appropriate at this particular time, Eric, is the fact that we do hire people in this profession that maybe may not be ready and may not be suited for the profession. But unlike other professions, whoever wears the badge, we're all represented by it. And we're all, whether it's a police officer in Florida or a police officer in Vancouver, it doesn't matter. We're all put under the same bucket. So it's so critical for all of our organizations to make sure we hire good people that are ready for the job and ready to accept that significant responsibility we give to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, going back to when you came into the police service, did your interest change dramatically, or did your career kind of follow a path that you supposed early on, and what you were most gravitating towards?
Yeah, I was blessed. I've had a wonderful career, and if I could do it all over again, Eric, I would. And I guess it's all in how you look at it as well. I certainly had disappointment, as I mentioned, getting deferred at first. And in Edmonton, we had a program starting in 1989 called the Neighborhood Foot Patrol Program. And there, at that particular time, Edmonton was about 1,400 cops. So there were lots of police officers there, and they looked for senior officers to be able to take on this new responsibility of community policing. And the community policing would be assigned a small district on your own. You'd work alone and be able to work with the community to partner and solve problems, obviously. And they couldn't get anyone to apply. Everyone was skeptical of this new program at that particular time in 1989. So I was fortunate enough to be able to take one of those positions. There were 22 officers assigned to neighborhood foot patrols, and I started walking the beat. That took me to about 1993, and great job. I learned more about communications, how to partner, how to engage community, the meaningful work that we all do that sometimes we forget. And during that time, I was training very hard to get into the tactical team, or in the U.S., of course, called the SWAT team. Mm-hmm. And my first attempt to be able to get in the SWAT team, I wasn't successful again. I was not deferred, just not successful applicant. I didn't get on to the qualification stage. However, the second attempt, I did get in, and that was about 6 months later. And I was fortunate to be able to get on the tactical team. And really about 11 years of my career was spent in some degree or role in the tactical team. I started as a sniper. I moved to the entry team and eventually became the team leader of our team, and then was a staff sergeant and an inspector, both in the tactical team. And our tactical team in Edmonton had the helicopter unit, it had our dog unit, it had our obviously explosive technicians, the entry teams, the snipers, and the emergency response team for disaster services.
Yeah, fantastic. That's a lot. And so again, you didn't get it the first go around. Is that something that has been innate in you when you look back, even in your younger years prior to the police service? Like, did you have that kind of get up again resilience, or is that something that you feel you've developed through the years?
I think it's growing. I think, I think that is something like leadership. I think it's growing. It's, some people have just some natural born ability to be able to be charismatic and be able to really influence people. I believe that the majority of leaders who are great leaders have developed it over the course of time, and it comes from battle scars. It comes from mistakes. It comes from learning. And, I'm not opposed to say that I make mistakes every single day. And those mistakes, if I don't recognize them, I don't learn from them, then I'm doing myself a disservice. So I continue to make those mistakes. Even as you mentioned, I was a chief for 12 years, but I've retired just in October here a couple of months ago. And I continue to make mistakes in my life and learn and grow. And that's an important part of being a leader.
Yeah, absolutely. I wasn't familiar you retired. Congratulations.
Yes, yeah, October the 9th, or I'm sorry, October the 6th, I retired after I spent 9 years in Delta as the chief there, and then 3 years with the Metro Vancouver Transit Police. And you know what? It's funny. Probably could have gone further, but it's time for others to take charge and others to lead. And you always want to leave when the team is strong and when you feel it's on top. Last thing you want to do is ride this slide to the bottom.
Yeah. Do you mind me asking whether you had always thought that this range of years would be a retirement? Because the reason why I ask is that in the last few years, with the undue scrutiny that police faced, a lot of police leaders found themselves having to make that decision. And this is not a place of judgment at all. There were some leaders that were like, hey, I had this intention to stay on. I'm not doing it this way. I'm not sticking around. And many police leaders that are still here and maybe recently retired, right? So this is not how I'm going out. I'm not leaving when the troops are under this much pressure. I need to stay and lead through that. Was that part of your calculation?
Absolutely. I think that there's a strategy. Certainly, I had a strategy that I learned from others. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that we always stand on the shoulders of giants. And I learned from many of the leaders that I worked for directly. And the plan was always to be able to do a 5 years term, typically a standard term, and hopefully you make it through without, getting fired or having to leave for some
Sure.
reason. Do your standard 5 years, sign for a second 5 years, but never do it. You want to leave when it's a surprise. You want to leave when you haven't overdone your welcome. You want to leave when the team is solid, and you want to leave when no one really expects it. So those were I did. That's why at the 9 year mark, I decided it was time for me to be able to retire and leave the team. And then it was in great hands, right? We had a couple of good deputy chiefs that were ready to be able to take over as well. And one has been promoted to chief and is carrying the torch.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, my interview is going to go a little out of order because we're talking about retirement, and I think it's fantastic that you're talking about police and you're giving us your time to help continue the industry in a positive direction. And I suppose that's really the focal point of my question is that I see, as I was introduced to you, a prominent police leader having meaningful, constructive conversations, talking about things that are uncommon to talk about, and having the Bend Don't Break podcast as part of that alignment of mission to share out these topics so that people can be more resilient, people can take care of themselves and have these critical conversations. And here you are with a smile on your face before we get on the recording. You're talking about how you've been married for 40 years. So
Yeah,
congratulations. But
thank
all
you.
these things, because that is ultimately one of my goals in this project of Blue Grit is how do we help police be their best selves so they can do the job for as long as they so choose and they can be well, that whole thriving beyond surviving. They're smiling on their way into retirement. They're thriving in retirement. So I think that was not as much of a question as a lot of comments, but I suppose my question is in reflection on as a recently retired uh, police officer and leader, what are the things that you just want to grab the whole police industry and everyone in it and shake them and say, hey, this is what you need to pay attention to so you can do it?
Yeah. You bring up some great points, and obviously, you want to be able to believe that from hire to retire, you can do the whole period, right? That whole period will be you come in strong, but you leave stronger would be the idea. Certainly something that I profess is valuable. The last thing you want to do is bring young, great leaders like yourself, Ian, Eric, and then leave when you're broken, right? You leave here broken and tattered, and life is in shambles, and then you live 5 or 6 years and you die. Last thing you want is that. So
Right.
you want our officers to go on and live, for longevity and have a great quality of life after. But certainly around the police industry, I think number one, people need to know that it's still a noble profession, a very noble profession, and is still a profession of serving. And when we forget that, sometimes we um, underestimate the power of public opinion, meaning that we started listening to voices that are far too, uh, they're not the majority. They're
Yeah.
a small group of people, and we began to listen to those in policing. And I don't think it did well for our brand, the brand of policing and profession. And the majority of people still supported police officers greatly. I know that during my time in Delta as a chief for 9 years there, tremendous community support, just tremendous community support. And when you needed them the most, they were there to be able to support you. However, there were some voices that were, didn't like police. They didn't like what police did and what police stood for, and wanted a different role for policing in society. But they were very small. And if we listen to that voice all the time, unfortunately, it begins to tarnish what we believe is so good about this profession. So my encouragement is that know that the vast majority of people still support policing and what we do and recognize the difficulty of the job it is. And don't let anyone tell you different.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate you saying all that because it is what I believe to be true. I was just having a conversation with a buddy this morning, walking the dogs, and we started talking about that. We started talking about how even in the bottom of the valley, I suppose, recently, and
Yeah.
I hope everyone is feeling the shift. I'm feeling the shift. A lot of my team are feeling the shift. We're coming back. We're having more outward support, but yeah, in those couple more tenuous years, it did feel like everyone, it was just hate and discontent. But we have to recognize those were some of the loudest voices that were also given a megaphone, right? They were on social media, they were in the traditional media, they were marching. And not to say anything against people marching, voicing their opinion, but it did feel disproportionate. It felt like the prevailing majority. However, if we're honest with ourselves, how many times during that time did people come up to you and say, hey, I know we can't abolish the police. I know I don't want you to go away. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And it's only continued to rise to a point where personally I feel a little uncomfortable about it when I meet people in just non-law enforcement capacity, right? Parents at school, whatnot. It always seems to come up as a thing when I share what I do for work and we share what we do for work, that someone says, almost like this side note where they want to say, hey, I support you, thank you for doing what you do, thanks for sticking through it, oh my gosh, you've done it for how many years? And I don't know what people are talking about when they're saying these things. It's almost uncomfortable for me because I'm like, no, I appreciate it, thank you, however, we're good, we're doing our
Yeah.
thing.
Well, what's funny about that as well is that you'll be in the coffee shop, right? And the person behind you or a person in front of you will buy you the coffee unexpectedly and want nothing for it. But they can't speak out against those loud, small voices because of the cancel culture, and no one wants to endure the suffering that may come as a result of being able to speak out. And those that do speak out in a public fashion certainly are prepared to be able to take on some of the rapid fire that may come from those that don't support the police. But this job is, I would encourage any of your listeners that are thinking about the professional policing or thinking about leaving the professional policing that, you think long and hard. It's a very good profession. Not only does it serve well for families to be able to support your family, economically, but in addition, you will obtain life skills that you can use forever. And that may take you to all kinds of different work, all kinds of different side jobs, all kinds of different side hustles that you can enjoy and work at.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you bringing up the cancel culture as a personal, I suppose, anecdote. Doing this social media and podcasting project, I connected with a local, I'll call him an influencer. He's not in policing as far as the space. It's a general kind of positive vibe, positive message page, right? And an outlet there. Uh, he reached out and he was super supportive, but he did bring up, and I don't blame him at all, right? He did bring up this fear of cancel culture. A lot of his brand, what he is about, he wants to be able to bring in law enforcement and say, hey, here's a cop that I know and trust, and I'm just going to ask him a lot of public safety questions on. And it was a lot of like traffic stops, what to do, all these things. We actually recorded, I want to say, close to an hour of footage, and it was just I was happy to do it. It was the same kind of thing I would do at a community meeting or going to a school or going to council, whatever have you, right? Answer questions and be filmed. Fine, good with it. I was really excited about it too. However, it hasn't come to fruition. We recorded it all, but I get it. Like, I mean, I appreciate his honesty where he was so worried that if he brings in this cop and now it's interacting with Commander Tung and we're talking about how to be safe, he's worried about these prevailing voices. And I mean, that's essentially what we want to get away from. Like, we can't always, again, not to blame him, I get it, but we as police officers, I'll say that, we can't be worried about the toxic energy. And if we think about it and we focus on it, it will overtake us. And a perfect example is, I think, as you were talking about, sir, is we start to believe it when we say it. And even that prevailing negativity towards law enforcement, we in law enforcement did actually adopt it. I don't know how many times I and people around me said, people don't want the cops, people don't want to be a cop, even to the point where I got into recruiting and I was bucking that narrative. I had a gentleman come to me from the local area, and he was an explorer. So it's kind of this cadet, junior internship volunteer program for teenagers and young adults in the neighboring city. And he said he went there because that was basically his mentor coming up for years as he was in high school, and he wanted to be a cop. And he went to him when he was old enough, and that officer told him, "Do not do it. Do not do it. No one, I care about you, man. Don't do this job. People hate you. I would prefer you did anything else." And what do most young men do? Is that going to talk him out of it? No, he came to me like a total stranger. Said, "Hey, I see what you're all doing. I see this positive message. I want to be a cop, and I don't want to be talked out of it. I know why I want to do this. This is what I wanted to do since I was a kid." And just an example where we can let that overtake ourselves, and then we continue to say it, and then how is it not true if we the police are actually saying it and projecting it out?
You're right on the money. You nailed it. Often we carry the narrative ourselves within, and the discourse within ourselves, or within the squads and the parade rooms that we're in. Eric, I've got to ask you, how many years have you been on now as a police officer?
I'm on 17.
Okay, so 17 years. Think about the change that's occurred over those years. And if you were not the type of leader you are, where you're flexible and understanding and recognizing that, society changes along with those 17 years, we end up with the people like you've just talked about who weren't willing to accept. They wanted a police like it was 2000 or 2005, and they didn't want to recognize that the world has changed, and it's changing even faster now that we're seeing all kinds of technology improve. So the officers that don't encourage people to join haven't been willing to adapt, to be flexible, to be agile, and to be able to be accepting of societal changes and recognizing that the role of police is changing. And if you don't do that, then you could obviously discourage people from participating in the profession.
Yeah, and what you just said, rolling in with what you stated earlier about how the job is valuable and it's a valuable experience, right? It's important. We know it's important societally, or it's critical, but then also the flip individually, like how much you can get from it, how much you can experience,
Yes.
how much positivity. And that is so important to focus on. And we have to be intentional at times, or we slide into that cynicism, sarcasm, and unfortunately, I think the worst being nihilism. But I think one thing that hasn't changed that we need to focus on is that purpose. And I think that in a lot of ways, when we look at, I suppose, some of the ills of society or some of the things we need to actively combat in young individuals is a lack of purpose. There's a lack of community. There's a lack of tie-in, and some of that's probably because of the technology that you just kind of highlighted, right? Where there's a lot of folks in my generation that are going through their, I suppose I'm past third year, but I would say, in the last few years, oh, I think so and so is going through their third year crisis or third
Oh,
life
yeah.
crisis, and then it becomes
Yeah.
the midlife crisis.
Yeah.
But we can avoid these crises with we have this continual North Star. And so it's not for so many people that is purpose and mission and doing something of value, of significance. And there's no doubt that we can backslide and lose sight of that because of the stress and the strain and the routineness. But if we're honest with ourselves, we know that we can affect someone's life in a neighborhood, in a community, in a more significant, hands-on way than any other job. I mean, I was just having this conversation with a firefighter buddy. He's like, you go to the thing, you go to the crash, you go to the fire, you don't help them rebuild the house. You don't you don't put the smoke detectors in. You just wait for the next one. You're idly waiting. And not to take away from fire prevention and community education, but in a different way than police. When they go out in the community, they're driving around, they're talking to people, they're finding, identifying, and fixing some of these problems. It's very different, that ability to do that.
I couldn't agree more with you. Certainly the profession allows us to be able to grow in many different ways. And tell me, I would be interested in asking you, Eric, how you actually have continued to recognize how to grow within the profession itself, and how you want to continue to adapt to change and continue to sort of have a positive journey in policing. What do you do?
That's a great question. I suppose the simple answer would be out of necessity. And all these things that I talk about and that are important to me that I think should be important to everybody, and not to like push things on people, but I mean, that's kind of what this is, I suppose. But the formula for me to have any success in this career has been identifying, I suppose, what I call these pillars of wellness. And that's not my unique idea, but I recognized I needed to invest in fitness to do the job and maintain my stress. And then I recognized at a certain point I wasn't sleeping on graves, but I was still working out and I was out over caffeinating. So I recognized the importance of sleep later than I ought to have, later than I wish I had. And then the adaptability. I mean, this job, as you pointed out, is so evolving. The world is so evolving. So we have to be aware of our value system, absolutely. But we need to be flexible in how we do the job, and we need to be flexible of how we receive input from the community. And I suppose that that's just out of necessity. Like it's adapt or die, and that's a law of nature in so many ways. So as I think about how I want to do this job the best I can and show up the best way I can for my people in my department or the people that listen in here, I also put in this I suppose theme of stoicism, which is that I can't control how long I have in this job per se. I can't control how long I have on this earth. So what I want to do is try to do it the most positive, constructive way I can. In this vein of maybe I have maybe I have 15 years. I don't know. But what I do know is that if I focus on those things and my North Star being my purpose and my value systems, then I'll be okay. And hopefully I can let that emanate around me to the circles I can have some degree of influence with.
Absolutely. Yeah. Family, fitness, right? Finance,
Yeah.
the ability to be able to
Yeah.
have good relationships, mental health, right? All those things are so important for us to be able to consider, and continual learning, the ability for us to read, to be able to understand, to listen to podcasts, to be able to, complete podcasts, but anything that will continue to allow you to learn keeps you, I guess, more nimble than you would be if you were, decided that all this job is about the money and screw everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there, we started talking about some of the F's, right? Fitness, finance, family. Are there any that you had significant learning points about in the course of your career in life?
Well, it was probably time to pay gratitude in relation to, a constable by the name of Aaron Hill. I think Aaron is a sergeant now. So Aaron was the one who brought forward the idea of being able to do a podcast. We had some scars in the Delta Police Department where we didn't deal with circumstances in what I would say the most effective way. And as a result of those, we needed to be able to do something to be able to impact culture and impact what we were doing. So Aaron brought forward the idea of being able to do a podcast in 2018. And we said, well, okay, what the hell are we going to do a podcast about? And we thought that, the ability for us to talk about resilience, wellness, the reduced stigma on mental health was so important and something that we needed to get the message out. And it was a way, as you have mentioned earlier, Eric, for us to be able to communicate with our internal audience. And really, that was the purpose when it began. We didn't realize it would have such a large external audience as well. But there were people looking for the ability to understand that, everyone has challenge. Everyone has sometimes they have down days and down times and down periods. And you never want to become that victim and have that victimitis, right? You want to become the victor, as you have said before. And the podcast was probably one of the ways that we thought of how we could contribute, both me personally and the organization, to the greater body of knowledge around policing and some of the impacts it has on us, because it does have impact. So when you talk about the F's, right, that's where we began to learn about the importance of fitness. We began to learn about the importance of wellness, of family, right, and relationships, spiritual, right? Some people have faith. That's the other F, right? Mm-hmm. But often I talk about spirituality, and right, it doesn't have to be necessarily religion. It can be any kind of. It can be yoga, if that is your way of finding, your Zen. But that ability to find some sort of faith in something. And what we needed to be able to communicate is that you should all have hope. Hope is such a critical element of us being able to make sure that people know that, although it may be a dark day, you've done some work today that was miserable and it's going to impact you for the next week. know that there's hope and you can come out of it and you can recover and you can become stronger. And I truly believe in the whole idea of post-trauma growth or post-traumatic growth, that people come out stronger. Once they have gone through some suffering and been able to overcome it, they come out much stronger and much more resilient.
Yeah, that's a conversation or a word I don't think we talk about enough, and that simple word hope.
Yes.
Have you ever seen this exercise? And it was on social media going through the swirls, but it's it starts with H and then there's three blanks behind it, and they're like fill in the blanks. And some people may say hope, but a lot of people fill in the blanks with HE double hockey stick or help, and then it really frames like it's
Yeah.
kind of this scary wake up. If you see H blank and you
Yeah.
think help, then that might say something. It might not be something that we need to read into too much, but yeah, hope is, and it makes me think of Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning,
Yes.
and just that the difference maker where you can make it through undeniably one of the biggest atrocities in human history, whether you can make it through that or not.
Yeah.
And some of these lessons from these, I suppose, pinnacles of demonstrating resilience and resolve and grit. And so, yeah, it's something that I don't think we really bring that word in a lot. Maybe as at the time of this recording, we're at the end of 2024, but when
Yes.
this airs in 25, hopefully that
Hopefully.
is a nice theme that we can all just inject a little bit more of that hope. And I think it can start small, right? It could start with, hey, can we make things just a little bit better today than it was yesterday?
Completely. Yeah, it doesn't have to be earth shattering. It doesn't have to be able to, solve world hunger. It can be something as simple as what's happening in your daily life and or you providing hope to people, right? Often we deal with people who are in crisis, and the ability for us now to be able to share some of that hope with them as well and provide them a way of being able to reduce the challenge or the stress they're going through is very not only rewarding, but it gives us the power of hope as well. So it's very cool.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of the Misogi challenge? Have you
It
ever heard
sounds
that term?
familiar, but please,
Okay.
please tell me what it is.
So that ties in a little bit to hope. So once a year, and I'm not the inventor of this, I've certainly picked it up off another podcast, is that you do a significant challenge that is out of the normal for you. So last year, what I did is I did a 55-kilometer walk. Right, I decided that was going to be my challenge for the year. But what it does is it allows you to uh, know that there's hope, meaning that you come to a good conclusion if you're successful in being able to complete the challenge that you decide. And every year, if you do that, what it does is it builds your level of hope and your level of optimism around what you can do and the challenges that you can accept and overcome. So it's a nice practice that I've started over the last couple of years that I think I'm going to continue for the balance of my life for sure.
I like that. Yeah, I wrote it down as a note and thinking about what kind of things we can inject, because it is that seeking discomfort, avoiding just staying comfortable, because if you're comfortable, you're not challenging, you're not growing. And I
Yes.
think that is where I want to, kind of go back is it was not common. It's still not common that a police agency would have a podcast to discuss these themes. But as you highlighted, is coming out of a recognition of some scars and some missteps and an opportunity, right? What I hear is hope that having conversations, letting people connect and having this form of communication that is unlike others, right? In a world of swirling like 3-second attention spans, this is long form, right? We're already closing on 40 minutes going at it right now, but
Yes.
you can convey so much more on such a deeper level, right? So it's depth rather than breadth. And it had to have been uncomfortable to have this idea and to build it and to put legs on it and then start moving it for topics that involve vulnerability, right? Not just on a personal level, but we're talking about organizational wellness, which I think that these two goals need to go hand in hand, because what good is it if I stand up a workout on duty program, but if people don't feel well to interact with
Yes.
their coworkers with trust, or they don't feel comfortable going to their boss for something that they need, like what is the point of any of it?
Yeah, no, you're right on the money. And in matter of fact, it took humility as well because there were many things we had to admit we were doing wrong. And
Mm,
as the leader of the organization, I'm the first to be able to stand up and be able to say that. is that there were things that we were doing wrong and had done wrong and needed to make sure that we learn from those exercises, repair the damage if we could, and be able to, make sure that it doesn't happen again, and setting the systems in place so it didn't happen again. And those systems continually change because the bar on wellness and resilience continually is elevated, and we need to make sure we're meeting the expectations of our employees and doing what is, I always say, if you're not serving the customer, you got to be serving those that are. So as a leader, my whole role is being able to make sure I give them the tools, the front line, the tools to be able to do their job.
I love that. It makes me think of that servant leadership aspect, right? And sometimes it goes probably overstated in some ways. I think especially when it's like promotional season where people try to, they want to put a tag on their style of leadership. But I think, if you think about it, you're serving those in your command, in your supervision, so that they can do this thing. And if you do it in the right way, not just you cater to their every whim, but if you do it with the right themes and values and intention, then I believe that has to translate into how they interact with their customer, right? The people they are leading and serving, who are the people calling, who are the people flagging them down.
Yeah, you nailed it. Absolutely. That's 100% correct. I do believe that it is overused sometimes. And when we're talking about leadership, right, I've got a little bit different philosophy on that as well. Is certainly, one piece of it is how I serve and serve the people that are doing the job. But I think to be a good leader, you need to be able to understand, number one, high EQ, high emotional intelligence, and be able to assess situations. As a leader, I would have to speak to a mayor. I would have to go and speak to a public, official of some sort, a community group, then go on a shift briefing table, and then go and speak to, an influential, I'm going to say provincial government for us, or sort of state government for yourself, a politician of some sort. So you had to adapt to all those different situations, and leadership is always about the application of influence. It's how do you gain influence in any conversation? So EQ allows you to assess the situation and know what style of leadership then to be able to apply, because each one of those demands a different style of leadership. For me to be able to say that, I'm a servant leader all the time is ridiculous, because sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I'm a command and control guy, right? And
you have
that's
to be
appropriate. Yeah, agreed. But it's around the EQ to be able to assess those situations, and the best leaders understand each situation and then use a style to be able to gain influence.
Yeah, what I hear is that being nimble, right? That adaptability again, right? So we talked about adapt to survive, and that is the situation, that is the challenge. How do you overcome the thing? And you have a toolbox, and hopefully your toolbox doesn't just have 8 different hammers in it. And
right on.
I'm not talking about different kinds of hammers. I'm saying the same, claw hammer. No, you have different applications. And, I just brought up a promotion, perhaps because it's front of mind. Our agency just had a promotional process, but in that, I highlighted this in a more recent Police One kind of excerpt, which is the reasons why people don't want to promote. And I've heard it a million times, and people have said that, they don't want to play the game, and they are who they are. And I think that sometimes they say that in kind of this coy way, maybe on purpose, but at other times, truly, it's not disingenuous to change your approach. It is smart, right? It's EQ. It's effective. Like, do you want to be staunch and inflexible, or do you want to be nimble and effective? And
Right.
what I like to highlight or paint an example, because people are like, no, I am who I am, and I say what I say, and I believe what I believe, and people know it, take it or leave it. Do you talk to your significant other the same way that you talk to your boss at work, the same way that you talk to a stranger?
To
I
your
would hope
children.
not. To your
Yeah.
children, to
Yeah.
someone else's kids. They're not your children. You're going to talk to them the same way as your kids without the relationship. And so, come on, like, what are we actually saying? And I think everyone can recognize to some degree that, no, you do recognize your audience and you cater to that, not because you want to be disingenuous, but because you want to be effective. You want to be received and have effective communication and share ideas. I mean, that's the crux of it. So I try to challenge people when they throw that out there.
Well, genuineness isn't about changing your personality. Genuineness is about your values. It's I'm humble. I'm a good listener. I want to, listen before I talk. I want to be able to understand before passing judgment. It's all those things that are your values. That's how you're genuine and you believe in your values. It isn't about sort of having to make sure that you have a conversation that's appropriate for your audience.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true,
Yeah.
right? Because you can say a lot of different things a lot of different ways, but have the same intention and
Yes.
values behind them, right? Officer A, for those supervisors or soon to be supervisors out there, Officer A may misstep, but because of their track record and their personality and how they come to own that situation, may be a very different conversation than Officer B, who does a similar misstep, but they have a host of missteps exactly the same. And maybe their demeanor is entirely different. They're taking no ownership, they're standoffish with feedback. Okay, that should be a different conversation with a different tone and probably
Yes.
different words. But the
You're right
intent's
on.
the same, right? Is to coach
Yes.
and to correct the behavior.
Right on. Yeah. No, you nailed it.
Well, Chief, what now that you're in retirement, what is going on? What are you filling your days with besides if you feel comfortable sharing your next Misogi challenge that you're brewing up? Um, yeah,
That's right.
what is on your plate?
Well, the next Misoji challenge will probably be a hike. I think I want to do some sort of mountain hike.
Mm.
So I haven't decided which one yet. So that'll be sort of my New Year's resolution. That's always sort of what I do at between the period between Christmas and New Year's. So it'll be a good decision making, but it'd definitely be a hike of some sort. I'm fortunate that I get to continue to work in policing, right? So I'm doing some projects now that are contributing to the greater knowledge of policing. One involving sort of multi-stakeholder partnerships. Another one is involving recruiting and sort of some of the barriers to recruiting that many agencies are facing now and not having enough applicants. So I'm doing some policing projects that I think keep me connected. They keep me connected to relationships that I value, and it keeps me fresh in the world of policing. I enjoy it. I like it. I would, like I say, I'd do it all over again if I could.
Yeah, well, I love it. Well, I so much appreciate your time and your tutelage, your wisdom shared. Is there anything you'd like to leave the listeners with? And if you could share where people can follow along with you, maybe LinkedIn, or how they can get in contact with you.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, Eric, again, congratulations on your podcast. You have you show leadership far beyond your years, so it goes to
Thank
show
you.
you that it doesn't require experience for us all to demonstrate leadership. So I value our relationship that we have, and certainly value the podcast and the product that you're putting out there. I know that you work very hard on it. You deserve credit for that. So congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Secondly, I think it's critical for people to be able to come who are either coming into this profession that are in this profession to understand how important of work that you do. Don't let anyone tell you different. If you need any kind of reinforcement, you can call me anytime and I'll tell you that the work you do changed lives. It is far more beneficial for you to be able to receive that intrinsic reward. And it's actually quite selfish, the rewards we receive by giving. Yeah, as you all know, and is common wording out there, is that when you provide enough value, right, it comes back in threefold to you. And it's true. I've been rewarded greatly throughout my career as a result of serving and being able to contribute to people's betterment. And, yeah, I'd encourage people to either listen to Bend Don't Break, which is on all the podcast platforms. And that's a Delta Police podcast. So I still get the headline of Delta Police for now anyways. Mm-hmm. So that's great. And I would encourage LinkedIn as well. I'm just at Neil Dubord on LinkedIn, and I try to put something out every day that is encouraging and positive, and it's always messages of leadership and hope.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for your example. That certainly translates beyond borders, which is so much what I appreciate about how policing is not about your city. It's not about your department. It's much bigger than that. And I know that so much of us see and share that even across the U.S. Canadian border.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge the next little while, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah. Well, thank you, sir.
Yeah, pleasure.
Oftentimes, there's a lot of candidates that want to take the next step in the organization and promote. However, they find themselves at an impasse with where to start. Or they know where to start, but they know that there are so many different elements that are extremely arduous, challenging, and stressful to prepare for. I've prepared a guide because I want to help everyone, no matter what their confidence level is in public speaking or recognizing the different elements or how to show up your best way and highlight your leadership style. A lot of times those folks know exactly what it takes to be a leader because they do it at the line level. However, they are surpassed by those that simply test better, have the gift of the gab, whether or not they actually can put anything behind it, or they've taken the test so many times that they've slowly edged their way up that list and eventually may be in striking zone for a promotion. So if getting selected for the next rank is of interest to you, I highly recommend you do your homework and you recognize resources. And part of doing that homework and recognizing resources is the guide I've prepared. It hones in on a lot of my lessons learned from being on both sides of the table, testing as a sergeant. And although I got the nod in the first round, when I looked at the notes, there were a lot of things I misunderstood. There were a lot of things where I didn't present my best way. I was just fortunate that my total test score was I was fortunate that my total testing process was successful enough to get me in. And then for commander, doing that internal process and external process, seeing some dramatic differences, coming out on top of both processes. However, learning again, when I looked at the notes, there was so much that I left on the table or so much that I misrepresented myself or I didn't convey what I had intended to the assessor. So with all those lessons learned, breaking down the common test components, and also, arguably more importantly, how you identify, define, and prepare your own leadership philosophy that you can not only take into the test, but you can take into your day-to-day interactions with your team, your peers, your subordinates, and your leaders, right? Because leading up is a critical part of organizational development and culture as well. So for more on the guide, you can find it at bluegritwellness.com. That's the promotional guide at bluegritwellness.com/shop. And whether or not you are looking to promote, we all know those people that should be taking the next test that we keep nudging. And those people need to be empowered. They need to find confidence. And a lot of that can come from you just giving them that nod, giving them that support, that encouragement, and telling them where to find the guide. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.